There is one enemy within Classic WoW's lore that has terrified players since even before the game's release. With their mastery over frost magic and their incredible necromantic power, they have cemented themselves as fan-favorite enemies within the World of Warcraft community. I, of course, am talking about the Lich. These massive skeletal fiends were once hero units in Warcraft 3, and in World of Warcraft, they occupy the spot of being some of the most challenging enemies that groups of players will encounter while adventuring across Azeroth. And yet, there is a corner of lore surrounding the Lich, or more specifically, becoming a Lich, that nobody seems to discuss. Many seem to have missed this fascinating piece of lore while adventuring through Classic WoW. Most seem to be under the impression that becoming a Lich is a type of ritual that only happens within the Scourge, but, well, that is what I want to talk to you all about today. An oddity in Classic WoW's story hidden in the background of the game's quest texts that I think will change the way that you look at these hovering skeletal nightmares, as well as the Lich King and his Scourge. But before we dive down the rabbit hole of the lore surrounding the Lich, I do need to talk about this channel's sponsor, Zygor. It is World of Warcraft's ultimate guide add-on. It's linked down below in the description, and if you want to check it out and if you want to purchase it someday after using the free trial, you can use code Nixxiom for 20% off. When the word Lich is whispered in the night, immediately the image of a hovering, large, skeletal servant of the undead Scourge comes to mind. A former human wizard gone evil, now a commander of undead legions, wielding magic capable of freezing a beating heart within the chest. And yet, did you know that this wasn't exactly always the case? Let's quickly talk about the history of these most terrible foes, because it will be important to understand for what's coming later on in this video. Let's rewind the clock and go all the way back to Warcraft 3 and the Third War. Specifically, let us look into the Warcraft 3 game manual. Opening it, we learn of the true origin of the Lich in Warcraft's lore, how they were originally created, and this is what the manual reads. While on Draenor, Ner'zhul commanded a number of orcish warlocks and spell-wielding death knights. Yet when Kil'jaeden and the Legion captured these sorcerers after the world's destruction, they were transformed into twisted, spectral aberrations of their former selves. These newly born Liches possessed tremendous magical powers, yet their immortal undead bodies were bound to the iron will of Ner'zhul. As payment for their undying loyalty to Ner'zhul, the Lich King granted them control over the furious elements of Northrend. Now, the Liches wield frost magic along with their own considerable necromantic spells. This, everybody, is how the Lich came to be originally. A bunch of twisted orc warlocks and death knights. I should also note that the death knights that the manual is talking about here were the creations of Gul'dan during the events of the Second War, not the death knights you all might be familiar with from the Scourge that are now a playable class in the game. Maybe we'll have to make a whole video on those guys later on. But however, moving on, in the game itself, Warcraft 3 also introduced to the lore a new way to create a Lich that didn't require the direct hand of Kil'jaeden the Deceiver. You see, after Arthas killed the necromancer Kel'Thuzad, he took the elderly man's remains to the Sunwell in Silvermoon City to restore him to life. And after placing them into the pool's magical waters, Arthas called out to the power of the Lich King, and under the watchful eye of Tichondrius, the Death Knight was able to revive Kel'Thuzad as a Lich, a far more powerful being than the necromancer was before in his life. So in this instance, rather than the Lich being made by the hands of the Burning Legion and Kil'jaeden, it was created by the Lich King himself through his servant Arthas Menethil. And this is important to understand because clearly the Lich King now possessed the Legion's power to create Liches by his own terrible hands, and create them he did. During your time in Classic WoW, you can encounter a number of these enemies while questing through Azeroth. In Razorfen Downs, we battled against Amenenar the Coldbringer, Araj in Anderhall, Raz Frostwhisper in Skullomance, Balzaphon of Strathholm, and in Classic, we also went all the way to the frozen heart of Naxxramas, where Kel'Thuzad himself awaited us, ready to raise us all into the Lich King's service. And for us lore enthusiasts, all the way back in the day, while fighting all of these Lich commanders of the Scourge, we sat and pondered, how many other Liches must reside in the frozen wasteland of Northrend, ready to unleash their magic upon the living of Azeroth? The thought just gave us shivers. It made the Wrath of the Lich King expansion all the more exciting. And yet, everybody, we arrive to it at last. The mystery, the oddity in the lore that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and that is that in Classic WoW, this act of the creation of the Lich was actually expanded upon even further as the game revealed to us that there is a mysterious third way of becoming a Lich that does not require either the Lich King or the Burning Legion. And I guarantee that most WoW players, even lore enthusiasts, are not aware of this. But how is it even possible? Well, the truth is, nobody is entirely sure, except for, well, one person. And if we're going to meet him, we're going to have to take a trip to Hillsbrad Foothills. When you walk through the green and beautiful lands of Hillsbrad, it's a strong contrast to the northern lands of Lordaeron, where places like Silverpine Forest, Tirisfal Glades, and the Plague Lands are corrupted by the influence of the Scourge. Hillsbrad seems entirely untouched, spared the horrible fate of suffering the wrath of the undead, and yet hidden amongst these beautiful trees is a story that many are familiar with, but whose details are often overlooked. In Terran Mill we find ourselves, and there, amongst the various Horde NPCs, we can find one by the name of Novice Thyvand. And upon speaking to him, he reveals to us a curious story. He says that some time ago, perhaps just before the events of Classic WoW or Warcraft 3, he was the apprentice of a powerful necromancer named Helcular, and his master, we are immediately told, was on the verge of transforming himself into a Lich by his own means, something that his apprentice likely wanted to learn as well, given what he tells us next. Thyvand says that moments before his master was to perform the ritual to transform himself, the citizens of South Shore nearby, who had learned of this man's dark magic being practiced in their land, they banded together, formed a mob, and they stormed Helcular's lair, which had recently been discovered. This band of peasants, guardsmen, and craftsmen, they all dragged the would-be Lich from his lair, and Helcular watched as they threw a rope over the branch of a nearby tree, all before placing a noose around his neck. Despite whatever power this necromancer had, this lynch mob was too great and far too many, and he was hoisted up into the air by the rope until his final breath was taken away from him. After his death, Helcular was taken down from the tree at a later time, his body escorted to South Shore, where he was buried in a grave to be hopefully forgotten as a bad memory of Hillsbrad's past. But there was one who survived and one who remembered. Helcular's apprentice, who now tells you that he wishes to revive his master from the dead so that his vengeance can be rained down upon the people of South Shore. How this is going to be achieved is by traveling to Helcular's former lair, which has been overrun with yetis from the mountains, and getting a mysterious rod that the master wizard prepared in the off chance of his untimely demise. This rod would then be charged at 3 magical locations that Helcular prepared during his life, also that its power would be strong enough to bring him back from the dead. This is a short quest that we go on, and it concludes just outside of South Shore in the graveyard, where Helcular is raised from death and he attacks the nearby town with a handful of skeletons. And with him now raised, it is likely that his ritual to become a Lich at last will soon resume, something that again I would wager his apprentice is quite eager to observe and to learn for himself. But wait, you might be asking yourself, how? If the Lich was this secret creation of the Burning Legion, how did random wizards gone necromancer on Azeroth learn this dark magic? Did a demon share with them the knowledge? Did some warlock come along one day and trade the knowledge for some conjured mana biscuits or something? Well, the lore in Classic WoW doesn't exactly say, but there are two likely theories as to how this is possible for there to be liches in Azeroth who are not affiliated with the Scourge or the Burning Legion. And let me break down both of those theories for you. So the first theory is that the Lich is not actually an original creation of the Burning Legion and Kil'jaeden. It is possible that the Lich has always been this undead, necromantic horror that has roamed various cultures and worlds, existing primarily in folklore and in nightmares. And there's always been this degree of awareness of their existence. But the Lich itself was incredibly rare, and the knowledge of how to create one, or even become one, became a closely guarded secret of the Legion upon its discovery, which of course they used in the creation of the Scourge, gifting the knowledge to their puppet, the Lich King. Now, this is a pretty good theory, and of course it does fit into modern World of Warcraft lore. However, we're talking about Classic WoW here, and this idea does kind of go against what we read all the way back in Warcraft 3's manual, and that is why there is this second theory which fits a lot better into this classic version of World of Warcraft's lore, and let me share it with you all now. So the alternative idea is that the Lich is a creation of the Burning Legion, as Warcraft 3's lore establishes, but somehow this knowledge got leaked into Azeroth. Maybe not the full knowledge of how to become a Lich though, which is why you don't have a ton of non-Scourge affiliated Liches running around, but some information regarding the ritual, some of the knowledge of Lichhood likely came into the awareness of various arcane wielders across Azeroth. The only question is how? How did this esoteric Legion and Scourge-only magic leak into the general population of wizards and mages in Azeroth? Well, you kind of have to do a little bit of digging in Classic WoW and Warcraft 3's game manual, and then you'll find the answer. It was the Lich King himself who likely did this. Let me explain. Before the formation of the Undead Scourge and the Cult of the Damned, it is established lore that the Lich King reached out to many powerful arcane-wielding individuals, tempting them with the opportunity to join the Scourge. The most famous person contacted, of course, was Kel'Thuzad, who became the founding member of the Lich King's Cult of the Damned. Now, when Kel'Thuzad is killed in Warcraft 3 and is later brought back to life, he claims that the Lich King now had fulfilled a promise to him. Kel'Thuzad had been granted eternal life, however, he also now had been transformed into a Lich, which almost seems to be something that Kel'Thuzad was aware of, that it was going to happen. So it's very likely that when the Lich King initially reached out to Kel'Thuzad before the events of Warcraft 3, and when he began to reveal to him his plans for the scourging of Lordaeron, the Lich King likely also told the would-be necromancer about his possibility of being granted Lichhood. And it was clearly this offer to Kel'Thuzad, the idea of being this immortal skeleton commander of uncountable undead legions, it was that temptation that ultimately drove that wizard towards joining the Scourge. And it therefore fits that when the Lich King telepathically reached out to other various arcane masters across Azeroth, he tempted them with the same offer that he gave to Kel'Thuzad: immortality and Lichhood. And to fuel their desires for immense power, it was likely the Lich King who gave to them their first tastes of hidden necromantic knowledge. Now, of course, the Lich King isn't going to tell these mages and wizards the full truth of the Scourge's esoteric rituals, like how to achieve the Lichhood that they had just been tempted with, because after all, the Lich King needs them to need him in order to get what they want. This is why the knowledge of a ritual to become a Lich would be known to someone like Helcular, even though he is not a member of the Scourge and has never been associated with them. Likely, he was a close friend of Kel'Thuzad during his life, which is heavily implied due to them being seen together in the Escape from Durnhold instance in the Caverns of Time. And he, like Kel'Thuzad, was one of the people contacted by the Lich King and given the same offer of power and immortality. However, unlike his friend, Helcular refused the offer, choosing to use the knowledge that had been revealed to him by the Lich King for his own ends, rather than serving the Frozen Throne. He became a powerful necromancer in the coming years, and he even came to understand the ritual of lichhood to a degree that he was going to achieve the lich form all on his own, no Lich King or Kil'jaeden required. But why refuse the offer from the Lich King? Well, self-servingness aside, let's take a little trip north into Lordaeron, because I think the lore of another Lich in Classic WoW might give to us the answer. That is Raz Frostwhisper. He is one of the bosses in Scholomance, who has a rather terrifying background on how he became a Lich. He was a hedge mage, formerly from Stromgarde, and he joined the Cult of the Damned early on for the promise of power. He advanced quickly through the ranks, and eventually Raz was given the blessing of being able to pledge his undying loyalty to the Lich King. Within Stratholme, the mage took forth a dagger and he cut open his own neck to the bone, spilling out all of his blood in honor of the Frozen Throne. And for doing this, the Lich King raised him as a Lich as a reward for his sacrifice. So clearly, becoming a Lich involves a sort of dramatic self-sacrificial ritual to the Lich King in order to earn the reward, taking Kel'Thuzad and Raz Frostwhisper as our two examples. And Helcular, I'd wager, wasn't interested in cutting open his own neck for a suit of armor trapped in some ice half a world away. Going back to Warcraft 3 for a second, according to the Necromancer unit's description, it says that before the events of the game, many powerful wizards of Dalaran were suddenly turning towards the dark arts, having been promised great power by the Lich King in exchange for their loyalty. Where once these men had been geniuses in the Kirin Tor, now they had been given mastery over the dead, as well as the ability to spread the Scourge's plague of undeath. Again, this is just confirming that the Lich King teased them with some necromantic power and what he could offer them down the road. So putting all the pieces together, I think that every wizard that chose to become a necromancer in service to the Lich King was tempted with the same gift that Kel'Thuzad was offered, that of becoming the Immortal Lich, a true reward for their great service to the Scourge. And it fits that the Lich King would tempt many within the Kirin Tor, as weakening the magical city and its defenses would be exactly what the Burning Legion would have wanted the Lich King to do to prepare for the Legion's arrival on Azeroth. However, as fascinating as all of this is, it does raise one final point that I want to address, a kind of elephant in the room that can be quite haunting when you think about it. It's actually one of the main reasons why I made this video. That being, if Helcular was contacted by the Lich King, and he was able to refuse his offer, who else do we know that were likely in communication with the Lich King at one point? Now, of course, there's the obvious ones that we know, people that eventually became members of the Scourge, like Raz Frostwhisper himself, but what about members of the Horde and the Alliance? Gunther Arcanus in Tirisfal Glades is a necromancer that is so powerful in his art that locals believe that he is actually a lich, despite lacking the skeletal form. And where did he learn this degree of necromancy? I wonder. Thule Ravenclaw in Fenris Isle, he is a master of the Scourge's Rothide Knolls, and both Gunther and Thule were friends with Bethor Iceshard of the Undercity during their lives. So was Bethor one of the most powerful mages among the Forsaken? Was he also in communication with the Lich King at one point? Morbant Fell of Duskwood, although there was no story directly tying him to the Scourge, isn't it possible that he was also a former wizard contacted by the Lich King and told to weaken the lands surrounding Stormwind to prepare the area for a Scourge invasion? Perhaps even Abercrombie. Yeah, Abercrombie, the Embalmer, who I want to discuss more in a future video. This character in particular is one of the most fascinating lore characters in Classic WoW, but not necessarily for how he appears on the surface. But he is a discussion for another time, but one I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you all. Lastly though, there is Archmage Malin, who gives to us a clue that perhaps his master, who resided in Stromgarde, just like Ras Frostwhisper, his master too was quite likely one of the individuals on the Lich King's contact list. And the reason being is that he sends you on a quest to retrieve the trinkets of his now deceased master. And one of those trinkets is in fact a personal phylactery that he had crafted in his life. And if Malin's master was a would-be Lich who had learned the art of crafting his own phylactery from the Lich King as a tease of greater power, does that imply that Malin himself may have been contacted too? After all, he is powerful enough as a mage to be considered an archmage in Stormwind. And why exactly is he seeking his master's trinkets and knowledge? What is he going to use it for? I wonder. Now, the reason I bring up these NPCs, both on the Horde, the Alliance, as well as those individuals you might encounter that aren't directly tied to the Scourge, is just to make you all realize something. It's all a bit of theory crafting and fun, but the reality is there are likely many people across Azeroth, some you might even call your friends and allies, that at one point were communicating with the Lich King in secret, learning some of the Scourge's magic, and then practicing the arts behind closed doors to discover more. And that is a forgotten piece of background lore that I feel that not only adds more depth and immersion to the world, but really adds to the richness of the Lich King's story and his influence across Azeroth. In Classic WoW, how many NPCs do we encounter that likely pursued the same path as Helcular, becoming a Lich, all on their own, without the eternal service to the Lich King? We may never truly know the answer to that question, but it's a lot of fun to speculate, especially while we're grinding away on mobs in Classic. So I hope you all enjoyed this little video. The world of Azeroth is just full of so much mystery and wonder. I just couldn't help but share some of these ideas with you all, so that maybe like me, while you're adventuring in World of Warcraft, encountering the various mages and wizards of the land, you might pay a bit more attention to their quests and their dialogue to see just how trustworthy they really are. A big thank you to our channel sponsors here on Nixxiom, and if you guys want another video to watch, I highly recommend these two on your screen right now, WoW's Best Forgotten Storyline or WoW's Best Forgotten Villain, where I go into further detail about the lore surrounding the prodigal Lich of Tirisfal, as well as the Master of Fenris Isle, both of whom I mentioned earlier in this video. So I hope you all enjoy and stay tuned, because in my next upcoming lore video, we are going to Duskwood.